So first of all, thank you to the organizers, to Nicole, to Beth, to Mullik for inviting me here to join this group. And thank you all for coming and contributing to the conversation here. We have spent years automating clinical trials and transforming R&D in general, clinical trials specifically. But automation alone is not enough, is what we're finding. So part of the reason is that what we're doing is we're automating one process at a time. And then you have to go back and look at how these processes work with one another. We have the opportunity here by using AI and Agentic AI to actually get the help that we can use to be looking across the board. So as I talk through my presentation and go through some slides, I will clarify the difference between automation, AI agents, Agentic AI. Hopefully, that will be a little bit clearer. And I want us all to be imagining trials that learn as they run. So we know about adaptive trials. That comes in the design of the trial. Well, the operational aspect of it can also learn so that we can actually move from one process at a time to actually learning, to AI agents that learn. So I offer that as a starting point. And we're doing this not for speed's sake, although that's important, but rather for getting better outcomes. So let me see if I can, am I doing this right to advance? Maybe? Do I need to point somewhere? All right, what am I doing wrong? Am I going back? No. Okay, it wasn't me. Can I just move them from here?
It's turned off.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay, sorry about that. Right, so some market metrics. Numbers that I'm sure you're all very well familiar with. So really only starting there to kind of remind us that even after years of automation, we still have, I'll start with the bottom numbers, 50% of trials that don't reach their endpoint. Now, they don't reach their endpoint for a variety of reasons, but some of those reasons are flaws in trial design, and I'll talk a little bit about how AI is helping us to design better trials that will require less amendments, hopefully no amendments, right? Well, that's our goal, and that will reach the outcome, that will have the right outcome measures. So 50% of trials don't meet their endpoint. 48% of sites will fail to meet recruitment standards. And by standards, it can be the standards that are set by the sponsor, but really mostly it's patients dropping out, not finding all the patients that are needed, not finding the right patients that we're going to see the outcome from. And it's not to bias, it's the trial. It's not to be selective on who is allowed into the trial. It's getting the right patients in that will benefit from the therapy so that we can see you, so that other patients can have a chance of benefiting from that therapy. And if that means that some patients don't end up fitting the criteria to be part of the trial, it means that they're probably not going to benefit. So we should find other trials for them, another therapy for them, and focus the right patients for the right therapy so that we can get the outcomes that are needed so other patients can also benefit. Trial operations, we spend 10 to 15 million or more on just the operations of trials. And many of you will know this. So patient recruitment is an important component, but also site management, data collection, so reducing the inefficiencies of collecting data, and being able to reuse the data are all important components. This is a slide which you all know, I'm sure, but just to kind of illustrate a little bit and break it down, the trial journey and the journey of the patients. At the end of that slide is the happy patient, because they've been either cured or they don't have the symptoms, or the disease have been halted or what have you. So it all starts with protocol design. and the issues that then end up requiring amendment. So if we can design better trials, then we can reduce the timeline of the trial at least by 2 months, usually more like 6 months to a year, depending on some of the amendments that need to be included. And the savings can be anywhere from 200,000 to 2 million. Site selection is another component where 6 to 12 month delay in finding the right sites and activating the site for the trial of interest. Patient recruitment, I mentioned already, and I will keep mentioning it because that's something that we are working very hard to make sure that we find the right patients who will benefit from the therapy for the trial, because they benefit right away, plus it informs the trial and the outcomes. But also to help the patients understand what they're going through in the trial, or what they will go through the trial, which we can use AI for as well, so that we have less patients dropping out. Because it's one thing for a patient to drop out after a few days or a month of the trial. It's another thing when they drop out towards the end of the trial, and now you're not meeting the numbers that you need in order to have the right statistics to know whether your therapy worked or not. So that patient recruitment component goes throughout. It's not just to find them at the beginning, it's to support the patient throughout. Patient attrition accounts for probably the biggest cost outside of the collective cost. So reducing patient attrition can actually make a huge difference in the cost of the trial and in the timeline of the trial. Unfortunately, even in today's world, we've got quite a bit of data collection errors still happening. So whatever it is that we can do to reduce that will also save time, will also save costs. With data collection comes data management, where you're storing the data, how easily people can access the data, how they can access the data without finding the wrong or taking a long time, or finding the wrong data set before they get to the right data set, et cetera. And then another very important component is safety detection signals. Detecting safety signals early as possible, in order to have the best outcome for the patient and, of course, the best outcome for the trial as well. And last but not least, submission preparation. So the less amendments that we have, the easier the submission, the less data issues we have, the easier the submission, and so on. So all of it contribute to the submission and making sure that we have compliance from the very first day, from the get-go, from the design of the trial. So I have some other numbers here, and most of them, the sources for some of these numbers are in the previous slide, actually. But 1 day's delay can be worth $1 million in prescription drug and biologic sales. Perhaps more importantly, it increases the cost, which means that people who get the drug at the end need to pay more for the drug. This is something I'm sure you're very, very familiar with. I'm not here to tell you what the process is, but rather to start suggesting where AI can impact and how AI can impact. And right now I'm using the term AI generically. I'm not focusing on automation or AI agents or agentic AI, just saying generically AI. So from the very beginning, I mentioned the design of the trial. And I'll actually focus more on that today for the rest of the talk. But from study design all the way through to regular submission, there are different steps that I've outlined here that go through from using historical data to design better trials, looking at feasibility early as you're designing the trial, not after you've designed the trial, forecasting early, so being able to have a digital twin of your trial that you can follow, that you can run through the whole process before you even sign up the first patient. So that starts at the very beginning. And then comes the site selection, patient recruitment, again, different steps that I will talk through a little bit more, I think in the very next slide, in fact. Also important, the data collection, making sure that we are collecting the right data, storing them appropriately, having the right standards that are consistent, and having ontologies that help be the glue and connect the data together. So, and then it goes through the analysis. If you and it's funny how that all builds, right? If you get something not quite right at the beginning, you feel it at the end, and it costs you more at the end. And by cost, I mean like people's effort and so on. So all the way through to study close. So it goes from study startup through the study monitoring, through study close, all the different areas and steps where you can automate or use AI. Here are the 3 areas that we focused on within EPAM, and what I'm actually advocating very strongly is trial design. Let's optimize trial design. Let's get that first step right. Let's learn from our historical data, our legacy data. We have so many trials. Sometimes one client will only have the trials that they have access to. There's also clinicaltrials.gov. There are other sources externally. So let's get the data that we have, and a partnership across pharmas, which is one of the things that I'm pushing right now, is learning from one another will benefit everyone. So let's start by AI-powered trial design and using real-world data and legacy data to design our trials effectively. With that comes document content authoring. So automating the content authoring, not completely, but automating it enough that you can actually have, based on the data that you've collected, you can have a first draft of the protocol already ready for you, for the folks who do the trial design, to then improve upon. And last but not least in that pillar, if you will, simulation. Simulate the trial before you ever go to one of the sites. You will learn from that. You will learn what the components are that need to be monitored. You will learn the components that you need to follow more closely in the trial. You'll get a sense for where you might have some bottlenecks or some challenges. It does not replace running the trial, but it absolutely is a fantastic first step to get a better trial design, to identify the right patients that will benefit, and identify where the bottlenecks are going to be along the way. The second pillar that I have is operations intelligence. So assuming you've designed the trial well and optimally, now site activation, smart enrollment of patients, engaging the patients, finding them, the ones that are going to benefit, finding them wherever they are, making sure that they're aware that there's a trial that they could benefit from, making it easy for them to learn about the trial and to sign up to the trial. One of the things while I was at one of my companies that we were involved in is by the time the patient goes from agreeing that this trial is going to be beneficial for them, the physician actually agreeing and the patient agreeing, to the time of signing up for the trial, the patient would get lost somewhere in the shuffle and would never actually end up signing up for the trial. So let's reduce that timeline. Let's be a little more smart about how we get the patient from the doctor's office to the trial site. Assistance for the patients, but also for the healthcare provider. So let's engage the patients in a real way, not just in a, you got one more app that you add to your phone, and you may or may not use it, and you may or may not, see what it's telling you. But engage them in an intelligent way where, now that we're constantly on our phones, you can actually get the information that you need and ask the questions and get answers to your questions in real time for the questions that you have as a patient, so you're less likely to drop out. And if you can't get to your appointment, you can get some help for whatever the reason is that you can't get to the appointment. Maybe it's okay to go later. Maybe you need a ride that can be arranged for you. Maybe you need to talk to someone before your next appointment. So giving the patients the support that they need. Monitoring trials effectively, monitoring the patients. So monitoring two things actually for the sponsors of the trials. Monitoring not only the patients, which is extremely important for safety for any early signals, but also monitoring the health of the trial at a particular site. So having these command centers where a sponsor can look at the trial at all the sites that are running the trial and identify which trial is having some difficulties early on. What are the difficulties about? How can we support that site? And being able to maybe shift some of the numbers that you've agreed on. Maybe you were planning on having more patients at one site, but another site is actually recruiting more patients because there's more prevalence of the disease there, or somehow they have more connection. Being able to react in real time and avoid delays. And last but not least, the third pillar is, I was going to say the most important one because I'm a data person, but it's obviously, it can't be in isolation of the others, but data, right? Being able to have confidence in the data, have the data in the right format, harmonization of the data, scalable harmonization of the data, having it be audit ready from the get-go, from day one, not doing it at the end so that it's audit ready. Categorizing the data so that, as we know, many of the big pharmas will acquire smaller companies. Some of the smaller companies will get acquired. There's a big disconnect between the tools that they use and the approaches that they use. Being able to very quickly resolve that if you're a large pharma and you've acquired a company. So having those types of tools that are able to help progress the trial and progress a program quickly. The bottom part is what things that apply across the board. So digital twins for simulation, for external control arms, et cetera. Agentic AI for patient support and operations, I already mentioned. Also pre-built and tailor-built validated digital trial infrastructure. You have that with Maxis IT. So being able to work with the right tools, and especially, again, I don't know what the audience is, if you're all a large pharma, small pharma, or small biotech, but I see a lot of smaller companies, and the reason why I decided after 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry to actually go into consulting is to bring all that knowledge and experience to not only individual pharmas across the board, but also to smaller companies that are getting started. I'm consulting with a few of them now to get them started on the right foot, right? Because they can't afford the big, fancy, expensive systems, but they also can't afford to not have something, right? Because then it comes back to haunt them later. So I wanted to take a moment, and I don't know if this audience needs that, but to just set the stage on AI domains, AI agents versus agentic AI. So this you probably are very familiar with, right? The AI became more popularized. I call it it went from being a bottom-up approach to a top-down approach. Everybody interested in it because of ChatGPT, because large language models. But in reality, there's so much more. Large language models is a small component, an important component, but you have deep learning, machine learning, sorry for not putting the definitions up there, and then AI encompasses all of it. And some people will put natural language processing in there as well. You might put other automation components in there because some of them will have, some might be partly in AI and partly not in AI. But nonetheless, I want to put that up in order to get to the next slide, which is the evolution from AI agents and agentic AI. It took me a little bit, like when we first started talking about agentic AI, going, okay, is that the same? What's the difference? So there is a difference, right? And the difference being AI agents are autonomous entities designed to perform specific tasks. So what I said, you look at one task at a time, and you apply automation or you apply AI to complete that task. Agentic AI represent a higher level of autonomy, still with a human in the middle. So it's not like they're going to run off and run the trial on their own, but rather the agents can talk with one another, right? And the system is able to reason and adapt and pursue goals, not just one little process, but actually can pursue the broader goal of what we're trying to do with a trial. So again, the key differences are that agentic systems learn, coordinate, optimize across, and it's an evolution. And I always use the example of a hammer versus a sledgehammer, right? So if you need to put a nail in, you don't need a sledgehammer. And the same thing goes for AI agents and agentic AI. You may not need agentic AI. You may be fine with simple automation. I don't know if automation can be simple, but anyway, you may be able to get away with automation. You may need AI agents. You may need agentic AI. Fit for purpose is probably the most important thing that we can do here. And I really felt like I wanted to put that in the middle to make sure that we don't forget that the human remains in the middle, right? With all our biases, we remain in the middle, but with AI agents, with agentic AI, we can reduce the bias that we have by working and collaborating with our systems, with our agents, with agentic AI. And I already mentioned the importance of data. We know the importance of technology and AI, the processes. If you have the wrong process, there's nothing AI can do to help you. Although AI can propose and suggest improvements to the process, and then the human in the middle will actually reconcile that and figure out if that's the right, if that works or if it's going to break something. And our tendency is going to be to not change things, right? Don't rock the boat, don't change things. And I've heard that many times before is, well, it works, right? Why would you change something that works? It's true. Why would you change something that works? Well, because it could work better. And we know that it works but with caveats. So let's actually be open-minded about what the recommendations are and consider the pros and cons of that change. So human always in the middle, data core and key at the very top. Processes and technologies have to work together, and all four have to work together. So then if we go again to AI agents versus agentic AI, just to look at the different dimensions. So speed, already mentioned that. AI agents automate discrete steps. Agentic AI accelerates end-to-end, can look at an end-to-end workflow. Learning. AI agents improve a task within certain boundaries, within whatever task you've given it. Agentic AI can continuously learn across domains. And I mentioned the different agents being able to kind of communicate with one another. And there are examples in real life, actually, where you can have two agents start to communicate in our language, in English language, and then they switch to language that we don't understand. They switch to their own language, and the task moves faster. So allow that with the oversight. The human role is absolutely essential, right? Supervising the tools or collaborating with the intelligent systems, not being afraid of them, not giving them complete reins. If you have someone in the lab or in your organization, someone new who joins, usually what you're going to do is give them enough rope to actually try to move and not be completely dependent, not enough to hang themselves. Well, the same applies to your agents, right? So give them some autonomy, but keep an eye on what it is that they're doing. Be aware of your own biases, and are you pulling back because of your own biases, or are you pulling back because there really is a danger? And then I left the outcomes out. So AI agents drive efficiency gains, whereas agentic AI enhances decision quality and trial outcomes. So keep that in mind. That is the purpose. They have the same goals that we do. I'm anthropomorphizing them. I don't mean to, but that's the goal. So the two most important steps, in my view, in the work that I'm doing right now, is to focus on optimizing study protocol, the design of the trial, and patient recruitment. So I've chosen to focus on these two. The operations is also important. We'll get to that in a second phase, but we also only have time to go a little bit in depth on one of these because I'm keeping track of time here. So if we look at the first one then, let's leave the patient recruitment aside for now and focus on improving the design of studies. So you want to discover factors that correlate with patient dropout so that you can design the trial better, so your activities can be designed better. You want to look at the outcome measures to make sure that you have the right outcome measures for the right trial. You want to look at the potential adverse events and see if you can design the protocol in a way where you can reduce that. And you can learn from the actual design of the protocol, the inclusion-exclusion criteria that are more likely to get you the patients that you're looking for and more likely to be able to recruit those patients. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can learn from existing trials that succeeded versus existing trials, maybe past trials rather than existing trials, past trials that succeeded and trials that struggled or didn't meet their outcomes. So at a high level, what we're looking to do here is to leverage the existing knowledge. So you're taking data, documents from external sources, and you can also, within your entity, your own trials, if you're in a large pharma company, bring in the knowledge and experience that you have from your own trials. So you pull all that information together. It does need to be cleaned up. Unfortunately, we've spent quite a bit of time on data from clinicaltrials.gov, not to actually highlight them as they have the data in there, that's great, but you also need to check, and sometimes you need to go back to original papers to actually see whether it got pulled in appropriately and so on. So, and there you can use agents, you can use MCP, you can use knowledge graphs, depending on what you're trying to do and what you have available, taking that historical data and turning that data into a draft protocol. A draft protocol using content authoring, kind of an automated, and you can, the way that we designed it and others have designed it is to look at the results that are coming from your agents, from the external data or the internal data, along with the protocol that it has given you a first draft of a protocol, and be able to change some parameters and have it be reflected in the protocol right away, right? So that you can actually dynamically, as a collaborator, right? You can use the AI agents as a collaborator to design the right protocol. And all along, you have the confidence of the cleanliness and the appropriateness of the data that are being pulled in there, and you can look at every step of what the agent is doing in order to intervene where and as possible. With the idea being that the subject matter expert, and the subject matter expert would include the physicians, but also the study operations experts, are involved at every step of the way and contributing to it. Just expanding just a tiny little bit on this, is focus on the fact that what we've got there on the bottom, and you guys have a different screen here, it's composed of, remember how I said that you can have the smaller agents? So it's composed of a workflow agent, a template agent, a document agent, an analytics agent, right? So you've got the agents that look at specific tasks, and then you've got the higher level. So that all feeds into the authoring agent. What this allows you to do is, while I'm talking here about trial design and authoring a protocol, you can actually use this structure to actually author other documents. Because what you would do is you would put a different workflow in. You'd have a different workflow agent. You would have a different template agent. You would have a different document agent. And then you can actually use the same architecture, if you will, to then write other protocols. So when we have looked at agents in action for designing protocol, we thought about beyond the protocol, you're going to need to also produce CSRs, you're going to need to produce IBs, you're going to need to produce your regulatory filing and so on. So being able to plug and play, so to speak, while we're optimizing it initially for a trial design. So the idea then is, and the reason for bringing this up, is to be thinking about where you're going next. So you're not just building something for the purpose of one step in the process, but you're thinking beyond, which I know Maxis is also doing, thinking about the entirety of the process and keeping that in mind as you're putting the individual agents together and you're coordinating across the agents and bringing in your legacy information. That's the important part, is bringing in your legacy information. I mentioned fair data, and I want to be fair to that and actually have a slide on it, because it's fair data and ontologies. I didn't want to get into the details of ontologies, but the ontologies are the glue that hold information from different trials together. If you don't have the right ontologies, you can't actually do that connection across different trials. But it's essential to have data that are findable. There was a time, and I remember one of my the first organizations that I worked in, the head of R&D joked about how we treat our data like toxic waste. We bury it, put it into, we have it, it's safe, it's there and it's safe, but you can't really reuse it. And the knowledge that's there, it's in fact the reason why I went from being a scientist to being a data scientist and getting involved in technology, because I was frustrated as a scientist that I couldn't see past experiments. I couldn't see what of the hard work that we did to develop a drug, which ones succeeded and which ones didn't, and for what reason, right? We're in a much better place now. I've worked in the industry long enough that things have moved on. But still, the clinical trials are probably the last of the type of data that is findable and accessible and interoperable and, oh my God, reusable. Like, can we reuse it? And, what are we going to find out about the trials? And, what are we going to have to report, not report? There are ways to do that without taking that risk. And starting with fair data and interoperable data and reusable data are the right steps for clinical research. And I've outlined in the slides, which I suspect they might be made available to you, just quickly being able to find and leverage design new studies, integrating integrating data and being able to integrate data from different similar trials will allow the designers to create more robust studies because you're learning from them. And then finally, if you're going to build synthetic control arms, if you're going to look at virtual cohorts to learn from, you need that. You need that data. You need to be able to look at data across. There are many, many benefits from it. So in summary then, and to leave, I think, a few minutes for questions, if you have questions, the use of AI, agents and agentic AI, does promise acceleration of clinical development timelines, and that's what I'm focusing on. But I always also like to add, if we let it, meaning if we appropriately use our data or store our data, have fair data, if we have transparency, if we make sure that we're following guidelines and regulations from the beginning, not to restrict what we're doing, but to actually be informed of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And if we keep the human in the middle, and the human is aware of their own biases and is able to put some of those biases aside because they're not helpful. They're just because this is how we used to do it. So we've always done it that way. It's successful, that we got to keep doing that way. Not necessarily, right? You're bringing in new technology for a reason and allow, just like you bring in a new member of your team, and you eventually get comfortable and you allow them to move forward, and they might actually move forward in a much better way than you had ever imagined or that you could. The same applies here. So that shift from AI agents to agentic AI kind of mirrors the evolution from tools to collaborators, right? So enabling faster, smarter, more adaptive clinical development. So that's what drives me, and that's what I keep doing, and that's why I work in this space. And I want to acknowledge people who have contributed either to some of the slides here or are contributing very actively to thinking through the 3 pillars that I talked about and helping. And there are many more. These are the main ones that I wanted to make sure that I acknowledge. And with that, do we have a few minutes for questions? Whoa.
Uh-oh. All right, we're good now. Questions? All right.
Thank you for that presentation. That was very helpful. So just a quick question on augmented knowledge repository. Can you expand a little bit on that? And is that very much based on, when I look at this, right, and I'm designing, clinically developing a program in, say, what is a very rare indication, I don't have much on the web, on nct.com. There's not much going on in this indication, yet I'm trying to plan a phase 2-3 adaptive design. So would an augmented knowledge repository be based mostly on what has been fed into that, right? What exists? If it doesn't exist, what are some of your recommendations to utilize AI?
So part of the reason for mentioning and right now actually pushing to get that partnership across the pharma is because no one pharma has enough data on specific trials like what you just mentioned, so rare diseases or a disease where we have not really made much progress in the trials. So one aspect is that collaboration across pharma in a way, and agents can allow that, in a way where Pharma A does not actually see the data of Pharma B, but can make use of the data in Pharma B. There are many different ways that we can do this. There's federated learning. There's many ways that you can do that. Well, many might not be right, but there's more than one. So that's one. And the other one is, and the advantage of an AKR is that, or a knowledge graph, is that you can see the relationship. So you're right, you might not have a trial that is exactly on the disease area with the patient population that you're interested in, but there's probably a trial that has relationships that you're not going to be able to draw that relationship quickly, and whether the relationship can be based on inclusion-exclusion criteria, whether it's the outcome measures, or whether there's relationships in the disease and what you measure from the disease, or the target itself being in a certain pathway. So all those combined are the relationships that you can more easily see if you have an augmented knowledge repository.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, I got you.
Yeah, first, thank you, Anastasia, for the wonderful presentation. My apologies, I came in a little late. So I was just curious, very interesting, the concept of, building the protocol using the Agentic AI. And I'm assuming the Agentic AI works on various components of the protocol, has each agent like the objectives, the summaries, the schedule of activities. My question is, has this been in production anywhere else? I mean, in any organization, anywhere that you're aware of, where they've actually used this to build a complete protocol?
In various ways, yes. So I'll say for where I'm sitting, it's not in production right now, mostly because, and as I'm sure Maxis as well has it, you don't want to build something in isolation when you're sitting somewhere outside of the mainstream. Right. So you want to do that in partnership with a client. So we're in the process right now of looking for that, or a partner that has connection to a client. So what I'm talking about directly has not been tested in clinical trials, but others have done it to different extent, right? And so so yes is the answer to your question, but not completely in the way that I've described and the goals that we have. So what many have done is to automate the protocol generation based on their own data that they have, meaning the internal trials based on documents that they have available internally. Others have done it based on clinicaltrials.gov and have found that some of the data isn't clean enough for you to be able to use that. So sorry, Maulik, if you have something and I'm discounting it, but I haven't yet seen one that has that end-to-end, what we're talking about, and tried and true and tested. I think there are many who are working towards that, and many who will be successful. They're taking different approaches, and I think it's coming, but I don't think we have it yet in the way that I described it, but we're getting there.
No, yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. And at the end of the day, we are all in this together, right? We're trying to resolve a problem, and we recognize there is a limitation in the technology itself, with the hallucination and all of that happens in the while using the RAG model for building each fragment or component of the protocol. And like the previous question, right, about what do we do if it's a brand new indication or a brand new asset? Like, right now with all the GLP-1s going on, this combination of GLP-1s with other, like AFGF and all those. What do you do when it's brand new? So obviously it's going to take a while to have that database per se, where it can extract that data from or retrieve the data from. So in your mind, what do you think are the current challenges for this to be end-to-end? Would it be hallucination, or would it be the integration of the data that's generated with the next system or something?
Right. Thank you for your question. I think so. The hallucinations, in my view, my personal view, hallucinations are a feature. They're not a bug. They're a feature. And I know it's hard to take that, but the reason why you get hallucinations is because it's generating information from what it has. What you need to do is be careful about whether those are really hallucinations or whether it's telling you something that you just didn't think about or you didn't know. So sometimes they're absolutely hallucinations. And why are they hallucinations? Because we've not told the system that if you can't find the answer, don't give me something, right? So I think it's in the way that we interact with agents and the instructions that we give the agents and in the way that we build the Agentic AI to be very clear about what happens if you can't find the answer in the data that's there. What do you do? And to actually alert you, which is what we're doing in our system, alert you that this was not found in the data, but here's what we're inferring from the data, and here's the reasons. So if you have transparency, right? If you have transparent agents that give you the rationale of why they arrived at the conclusion that they did or why they gave you the results that they did, you can better assess whether that's plausible or whether it's a hallucination. And if it's plausible, then you should also not dismiss it, but look at it in a little more detail or look at another approach actually that can get there. And that's where you get the biggest benefit from Agentic AI, is actually the learning that it does and the connections that it makes, even if you don't have another trial that does this on this very specific disease. That relationship, that connection to other trials that you may or may not think about, because it's going to look at more dimensions than you're processing in your head. So it can look at more dimensions, and as long as it comes back with, I'm pulling data from the following trials for the following reasons, and here's the relationships that I'm seeing, then you're actually good to follow through. And that's the part we're not there yet. Right? So we're doing the easier stuff first, but that part we're not there yet. We're there in pockets, and I think we're getting there. And as you said, it's that partnership with others who are doing the same thing. Instead of each one of us doing it in our own silo and reinventing the wheel, doing it together will benefit everyone. Yeah.
Any more questions? All right, Rakesh, and then we've got 2 more questions.
Thank you for your talk and educating us. Question for protocol optimization. Mm-hmm. Is that the right place to start, or we should take it to clinical development plan or target product profile? Because sometimes they feed into, and then if I learn something, I have to make changes to my development plan. So what is your recommendation or thinking?
Yes, and I'm going to thank you for that question also, because I mentioned at the beginning that what we do is we get into one process at a time, and it's because we're used to working that way. Some of the trials actually fail not because of the design of the trial or the wrong outcomes or the patient. It was the wrong target that we went to in the first place, right? And that you're not going to solve with your trial design. So that you have to go back to your target product profile. What I'm hoping is happening, and I see it happening as well, is that we go at the very beginning of the process, so that when we're identifying even a disease area that we're going to go after, we've got all the information that we need to help write the TPP, to look at the target product profile. And we tend to do that in reverse, right? If everything we've done in clinical development, all checks out, well, it must be the target. Doing that, as you suggest, from the very beginning and moving forward, something that I didn't mention here, but something that I'm working with very actively, is to look at the entire process end to end, and actually starting from the very beginning, but not in isolation, but with a view of what happens at the end, what happens in clinical development, and allowing agents to help us with that process that looks across. So quickly, yes, TPPs can actually be, in many cases, the reason why clinical development trials fail, or trials fail when we are in clinical development. And we don't find that out early enough when we do need to be looking at that. Until, yeah, it's kind of where do you want to start? So you're right that we're not going to get to zero on, like, zero trials fail, and we don't have 100% by just starting with a protocol. But it's a good place to start, because when you look at the statistics, a lot of things fail in the clinical development stage. So ideally, we're doing it on both sides.
Just one follow-up on that. The other thing we are seeing also in the industry, also we saw in the press recently also, a refusal to accept data because of manufacturing issues at one of some of the sites, factories, because they didn't get cleared by the regulators. So the question becomes is, we don't want to boil the ocean because we're just beginning, but I think from the agent point, looking not on R&D side, but also manufacturing and linking it, because eventually filing would be blocked if if manufacturing side there is a defects. So,
Yeah.
and the cost.
Absolutely.
Of, yeah.
I'm going to take it one step further. I think we need to, and we have in the past, I think R&D has been accused of taking everything from commercial. You actually need to start from the patient's, I hate to call it commercial, but that's what it is, from medical affairs, from when you actually get to the patient. Because we also have examples where, and I've seen those examples more in biotech, where we have like a gene therapy, we have a therapy that patients can benefit from, but it's not being prescribed. The payers aren't willing to pay for it, right? So you need to do it across the board. And we do often start from the back coming in, but it's fragmented. So you're absolutely right. And we do need to, and that's where agents can help us, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
One more question.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. So I guess there's a follow-up to everything everyone asked in terms of your timeline for when you think this end-to-end for protocol development will happen.
You mean being able to...
Yeah, you said that we're not like fully there yet. I guess the question is, when do you think we'll be there?
I'm sorry, my crystal ball is failing me right now.
Everybody asks.
The answer is I don't know. The sooner the better. And I think, and honestly, the sooner that we start working together instead of working in isolation, I think the faster we're going to get there. Right now, everybody's racing to get to the same thing. I don't have a timeline. I don't know, but I do hope that it is within the next year or two. I mean, if you look at some of the reports that are written about using AI in clinical development, they vary anywhere from we're failing, we're not using AI well, all of the use cases have not delivered value, not being used, to the hype that individual companies have about the success that they've had when you go to conferences and so on. So it's somewhere in the middle there. I think the more that we collaborate, the faster we're going to get there. And it all depends on what your measure is for getting there. Are people today using authoring tools to author protocols? Yes, they are. Are they using legacy data to inform them? Sort of. And by sort of, I mean no one's yet has very effectively used the public data. They're using their own internal data, and that's limited. So can we get there if we're partnering? Can we get there within a year? Absolutely. Will we get there within a year? Depends on the partnerships that we are doing and how quickly we're putting it to the test. So I think within 5 years is what I'm going to say, but some components are going to happen sooner, and the more we partner, the faster it's going to happen. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
It does. I'm here from Merck, so large pharma.
All right, so let's talk later.
Okay. Oh. A little loud. If you'll all join me in thanking Dr. Christianson, we greatly appreciate your time today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.